But at the end of the day, this president committed to putting Americans first.
That's what Donald Trump is about. He's about employing Americans, building in America, and having Americans be the winners.
The consequences for our economy, for costs, for our families and communities will be harmful and lasting.
And although their policy will hurt American families, until that pain becomes impossible to ignore, I do not believe they will change direction.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, President Trump says the markets are going to boom. Well, that's one word to describe what happened on Wall Street today. He also said his tariff rollout that happened yesterday is going, quote, well. That upbeat assessment comes less than 24 hours after the president, let us say, upended just about 100 years of understood global commerce. Today, Wall Street experienced the worst day since 2020. The post-election boom that the president, when he was president-elect, pointed to, well, that's been erased. Stock prices down, and Americans with portfolios, either for their retirement or for now, are facing genuine losses and the unhappy reality that they may be financially worse off than they were before Election Day. Tariffs, of course, are trade taxes, and the wide-reaching effect of them sent shockwaves across the world. Stock markets in Beijing and Tokyo sank to multi-month lows. Foreign leaders lined up to condemn President Trump's actions, promising countermeasures of their own. J.P. Morgan, for what it's worth, warns the president's tariffs could push the United States and quite possibly the rest of the global economy into recession. Despite all of this uncertainty, the president's Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, sounded positive.
When the biggest economy in the world says, I don't like the way you're treating us, how about a little respect? Let the deal maker make his deals. Let the best negotiator and the best person who cares about America, let him make the deals.
Weijia Jiang joins me from Doral, Florida. Caitlin Huey-Burns is on Capitol Hill, but I want to start tonight with our Money Watch correspondent, Kelly O'Grady in New York. Kelly, as you know, there is a wag or two on Wall Street. Not many, but there are a few. And I heard one today say, well, if yesterday was Liberation Day, today was Liquidation Day. Lots of people selling off on the market.
Yeah, maybe not the best branding that you want to have if you're in the market right now. But yeah, look, you hit on it. I mean, this was the worst day, a single day for all of the major indexes since 2020. And what was that, right? That was COVID. So investors were looking at the potential impacts of tariffs, and they felt somewhat similarly to what was happening during COVID. I want to zero in on the S&P 500. So it lost, as you see there on the screen, nearly 5%. But in terms of value, it was nearly $2 trillion. Half of that came from those 7 big tech stocks we've talked about before. Magnificent 7, NVIDIA, Meta, Apple, etc. I highlight the S&P 500 because tech drives so much of it. And that is why if you're looking at your 401k today, it's not looking great because a lot of our 401ks are invested in funds that track the S&P 500. So a lot of investors said, look, tech is reliant on production in China, and that translated into losses for your 401k today.
And Kelly, what is the sense of prices as Americans try to process this, whether it's for items like furniture or items like clothing or things that they get at the grocery store?
Well, a lot of things are going to go up. I mean, look around in terms of what you're wearing, what's in your home. Most of what we buy is made elsewhere. And so in terms of what you're going to see in terms of price increases, electronics, TVs, phones, food at the grocery store, maybe not as much if Canada and Mexico had been a part of yesterday's reciprocal tariffs, but we do get produce from South America and food items from other countries across the ocean. In terms of how long, it's really going to depend on the industry. A lot of companies stocked up ahead of time, but for those perishable things and things that are coming across the border, you're going to see an immediate increase.
Kelly O'Grady, always a pleasure. Thanks so very much. Weijia Jiang joins me now from Doral, Florida. And Weijia, as you know, the president landed there recently, and he made some news on the plane, as he frequently does, engaging with reporters. And a couple of quotes jumped out at me. The operation is over, the president said. Let it settle in. But then he also said, tariffs give us great power to negotiate. Now they, meaning trading partners, to be affected by these tariffs, will do anything for us. So if the operation is over, are we still negotiating? Hard to know.
That's a great question, Major, because it's a confusing analogy that he's been using since this morning when he posted on social media saying that the situation that the U.S. is in because of decades of unfair trade with various countries is like a sick patient. He said he did the operation, and of course it's going to take time in this analogy for it to recover, but he said the surgery went well, and so that now it's just going to take some recovery time, not only for this patient to, come to, but also to, of course, in his mind, start thriving. So let's step away from that analogy, though, and go, into what he actually said also on the plane on Air Force One. That's why my nose was buried in my phone. I wasn't being rude to you, Major.
Not at all.
It's from our colleague, Jennifer. Our colleague Jennifer Jacobs actually traveled on Air Force One with the president to Miami here, and he did make a bit of news. Not only did he say that negotiations were open and that, he is up for a good deal, he said that every country has called us. He also said that he expected this tank to happen in the stock market. It was always part of the calculation, but he insists it is temporary and that, as you mentioned at the top, the stock markets are going to boom. He also, Major, acknowledged that it is going to take time for his plan to fall into place. He said that it will take about a year and a half or 2 years for manufacturing to get to where he wants it. That's really the first time he's attached a time frame to how long it will take for the supply chain to resettle itself to be reliant on American manufacturing rather than foreign products. And when you're talking about, a time frame for people looking for immediate relief on prices, that's a long time. Okay, when you're talking about a year and a half to 2 years of this adjustment period. And so I think, the president still has a lot to answer to, even though publicly he has to message all this confidence. Certainly, there are conversations happening behind the scenes about at what point could these negotiations happen? At what point could he take his foot off the gas and peel back a little bit, especially given what we are seeing?
And of course, Ouija, that is what so many trading partners are curious about. Is this something that's going to last until April 9th? Can you negotiate your way out of it until then or afterwards? And that also affects all sorts of investment decisions that people are caught in the middle of all these negotiations, real or imagined, are wondering about.
Well, yeah, and the other problem here, Major, is that, whether a deal is possible before April 9th when these retaliatory tariffs kick in, it depends on who you ask. Today, the press secretary said no. The president was very clear that this is a national emergency, that it is not a negotiation. His Secretary of Agriculture, who, of course, many farmers are listening to because they are worried about whether they can, continue with their plans this very busy growing season, whether they can get loans, whether they can import machinery that they need, whether they can sell any of what they're growing. She said that, yes, of course there is time to negotiate before the 9th because it's the president and he's the ultimate deal maker. But, in the end, Major, it's what he says that matters. And on Air Force One, he did just say that, he is open to that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens in the next few days.
And Ouija, just to be clear, anytime you're looking at your phone to get news for our show, it is never rude to me. Not ever, 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 ever. Ouija Jang, thanks so very much. Caitlin Huey-Burns joins me now from Capitol Hill. So, Caitlin, I can't imagine anyone was saying anything about this particular news story up there today.
No, everybody was conveniently buried in their phones as well, Major, when we were asking about this. Now, I'll kind of parse through the reaction up here on Capitol Hill. Democrats, as you can imagine, highly critical of all of this. But there are ranges among Republicans up here. You have a group of Republicans who are gung-ho behind the president, whatever he wants to do. You have a very small group of about 4, maybe 5 Republicans who don't like this at all and, in fact, joined with a Democratic proposal last night on the Senate floor to try to take away or negate the emergency powers that the president used to impose those tariffs on Canada. Then you have another group of Republican lawmakers up here, some from industrial Midwestern states, some from farming states, who really are uncomfortable with it. It's not what they would do, but they're also willing to give the president some latitude here. I want you to take a listen to a conversation I had with Senator Ron Johnson. He's a big Trump supporter, but represents the state of Wisconsin. Here's what he had to say.
He's president, I'm not. He ran on this, and I hope he's absolutely right.
And if he's not, then what happens next? What can Congress
That's
do?
hypothetical. I can't. I'm hoping it all works out.
Now, Major, you or someone at home may be wondering, wait a second, you're not just some man on the street, you're a member of Congress. Can't you do something about this? In fact, the Constitution lays out that Congress has oversight over trade and tariffs. But over time, over the past many years before Trump, Congress has really ceded a lot of its authority on trade, on tariffs, to the executive branch to be able to make these negotiations. So you do have some up here on Capitol Hill that are saying, look, we want to start to claw some of that power back. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, big farming state, he introduced a proposal today along with a Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington state, another big farming state, to have Congress weigh in on tariffs proposed by the executive and be able to have a say here. Now, we are starting to talk to lawmakers to see if they are on board with this, and we're waiting to see what that looks like and if that would even make it through the Senate and make it to the House. But what Johnson also told me in that interview there was that he doesn't like this proposal. He doesn't agree with the president that this is the only way to exert leverage for the U.S., but yet he is willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because his constituents, and we heard this a lot on Capitol Hill today, Major, that Republicans are saying, look, this is what my constituents voted for. And going back to Ouija's point, a lot of people up here are willing to give the president some breathing room to negotiate. That's how they're taking this.
Caitlin Huey Burns on Capitol Hill with all that. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Global fallout from the president's tariffs, well, let's just say this. It's spreading. Many fear the U.S. and the world might, if things break wrong, be heading for a recession. A closer look at international reaction and international implications next, right here on America Decides.
Although their policy will hurt American families, until that pain becomes impossible to ignore, I do not believe they will change direction. So the road to that point may indeed be long.
That was Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney doing what a lot of world leaders are doing today, trying to predict the future of President Trump's tariff regime and the implications thereof and how long it's going to last. For perspective on this and how it's affecting, at least today and perhaps in the next couple of days, the global economy, I want to bring in the global economics reporter for Bloomberg, Enda Curran. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Major.
So how would you summarize today's global economic reaction to the Trump tariffs?
I think people are talking about a shock that reminds them of maybe early in the pandemic. It's that kind of systematic fallout. You have economists now downgrading their forecasts for the US economy and downgrading their growth forecast for the global economy. And take China, for example. It's especially vulnerable to this trade war with the US. Some estimates there that up to 80% of Chinese exports could be impacted by these new tariffs. So certainly a shock on growth and trade around the world.
And one of the things that struck me today, listening to the analysts looking at the market reaction, was there had been an expectation that the markets had priced in the tariffs, but they were larger and more sweeping than the markets expected. That's why there was a downturn today. And that was not just in the US-based markets, global ones as well.
That's right. I think, as people are saying, it wasn't just a worst-case scenario, probably worse than the worst-case scenario. That's the way a lot of people are framing it today, the breadth and the scope of those tariffs, and not just on, key trading rivals, say China, for example, being the obvious one, but across the scope of economic allies, across some of the key hubs, trading hubs of Asia, Vietnam being an obvious one, for example. So there's a feeling now that A, this is going to mean more expensive goods in the near term, no matter what. B, companies are going to have to reshuffle and move around their supply lines. That's going to be very expensive with knock-on impacts on investment and jobs.
And when the president says, as I quoted him directly a few moments ago on Air Force One, the operation is over, but also tariffs give us great power to negotiate. It creates this uncertainty. Well, what is it? Are these the rates? Or is there a negotiated way to try to peel them back somehow?
Well, we're certainly getting hints of an aggressive response from trading partners already before we get to negotiations. So France and Germany, officials there talking today about pulling whatever levers they can to retaliate against these US tariffs. French President Macron saying French companies should stop investing in the US for the moment. And of course, China overnight saying that they're looking at ways to retaliate and will do so as well. Now, maybe we do get to this negotiation point, but right here, right now, we feel like we're at the ugly end of this trade war.
And what investors are worrying about is everything sort of locking up.
Oh, very much so.
Stalling.
Companies not making decisions to expand, companies putting hiring on hold. We'll get employment data for the US tomorrow that might start to give us some hints if it is having an impact. And of course, investors pulling their money out of America and going to the dollar today, for example, had a 1.5% fall. Instead, the euro and the yen rallying as a result. Question marks over dollar safe haven status. So negative response. To be clear, the administration says it will generate jobs, it will bring manufacturing back to the US, near-term pain, long-term gain. But what I'm just telling you today is that the initial reaction is fairly downbeat.
And I'd like your perspective on how the world looks at the U.S. economy, because I looked at these statistics today, they jumped out at me. The United States accounts for 5% of global population, 25% of global GDP. We're a colossus, and everyone around the world knows that. And if we start throwing our elbows around, I have to think that they're going to be protective of themselves and their own economy, not just because it's angering them, but because they feel like they must.
Yeah, that's the expectation now, that when the US puts up this kind of a trading wall, the biggest sweep of tariffs in a century, we haven't seen this before, now other governments are going to respond. They're going to put up their own tariffs and put up their own protective measures to protect their own economies and their own goods against the US. And that's the danger, that's what people are warning about, that we get into this spiral now of a tit-for-tat retaliatory trade war that obviously hurts global growth. Lots of warnings today. JP Morgan tonight coming out with a figure of about 60% chance now of a global recession. References back to the Smoot-Hawley era and the Great Depression. You might say some of those cases are maybe extreme. We don't know yet. It's still early in this process, but the point is there are lots of warning signs about where this could be going.
Enda Curran with Bloomberg. So good to have you here. I appreciate it very much. And what could be the most significant face-off yet? This is another topic, and it's an important one. Between the executive and judicial branches, a federal judge today held a high-stakes hearing about whether the Trump administration violated his order regarding deportation flights to El Salvador. The latest from the courtroom clash is next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. A federal judge is considering what consequences, if any, the Trump administration will face after a hearing arguments today over whether these officials defied a court order issued last month. You might remember the judge ruled that any planes carrying migrants deported under the authority of the 1798 Alien Enemies Act must be returned to the United States, not for release, but just for their processing under due process rights. In spite of this, the Trump administration opted not to turn the flights around, and they were carrying hundreds of alleged Venezuelan gang members to El Salvador. Scott McFarland was in the courtroom, joins me now. What happened?
Yeah, Judge James Boasberg, the chief judge here in Washington, one who has been criticized vitriolically by President Trump, wanted to get some answers. Why weren't those flights turned around as ordered on March 15th? This is so much bigger now than just those Venezuelan nationals. This is now a matter of, are my orders being listened to by the executive branch? Because if not, we got a much bigger problem than just deportations. He didn't like the answers he got today, didn't think they were declarative or clear enough. So he said in so many words, we could be talking about contempt of court in the coming days over somebody or some people inside the administration who haven't told me why those planes didn't turn around. What answers was he given today? Largely, the Department of Justice attorney was saying some of this falls under attorney-client privilege and that he can't answer as to what the administration was saying. But the judge didn't accept that. He wants to know whose name is on this decision to disregard an order of the court on a flight March 15th.
Now, if I recall, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, earlier when there were legal jousting about this, the administration said, well, it was a verbal order, and a verbal order didn't have the weight of a written order. And by the time the written order was, the planes were practically in El Salvador, so it was not relevant to us. Did that come up? Is that still a thing?
That was not an argument that was articulated in court today. It was made in filings previous. Didn't fly. That's why they had to have a hearing today. He wants some better information.
Right.
I mean, the order of the court is when the judge gives the order, it takes effect. The written version sometimes takes a long time to populate, so we don't wait just for
And it's not a common understanding that verbal orders don't matter, only the written ones.
That's right.
So we've moved beyond that.
That's not the issue now.
Okay.
The issue now.
And when you say the phrase contempt, what does that mean? It sounds heavy.
Well, it can be. I mean, a contempt of court can metastasize into some type of criminal case. It can metastasize into some type of disciplinary case in the court. They'll be putting the cart in front of the horse now, because the people who signed their names to these court filings are the Attorney General herself, Pam Bondi, her Chief of Staff, her deputy, her number 3. These are the top rung officials at the Department of Justice. Seems very provocative to have a contempt finding against them. So we'll see what the judge orders. That order won't come till next week. But there's a fundamental issue here. Outside of the arguments today, the judge actually wanted to know, did you understand me when I was speaking these orders? Did you understand what I meant? And one of the most illustrative lines of questioning, Major, the judge said, did you understand me to say you had to release these people from jail? Did you understand me to say that you can't still deport them through the normal proceedings? And the Department of Justice attorney said, no, we didn't understand that. The judge counterpunched, Major. Well, those who are saying so are mistaken. Clearly, that's been part of the political rhetoric ever since.
So what's happening in the courtroom adheres to a set of facts, even if they're uncomfortable for the administration, that is not being reflected in the political rhetoric being thrown around this entire conversation.
Where have we seen that before? It feels like the 2020 election legal arguments, doesn't it?
Right.
That there's a political argument being made, but when you get called before a judge, you say something a little softer or a little more elegant, not quite what you're saying politically.
And what are at least nominally defensible facts in court, which is where they should be heard and adjudicated. As always, Scott McFarland, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Republican lawmakers and President Trump's tariffs, why some in the GOP are already exercising a little bit of damage control. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Thanks for staying with us. Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul has emerged as kind of a prominent critic of President Trump's approach to tariffs. Among the arguments he's recently made is they might not fit within the Constitution. Listen.
It's not only bad, tariffs are bad economically, it's not good form for a constitutional republic to have taxes raised by one person. When our Constitution was written, it said taxes originate in Congress, and more specifically, they originate in the House. So there's nothing about this that's consistent with our constitutional republic.
I want to bring in our political panel. Jaime Moore was Chief of Staff to former DNC Chair Jamie Harrison. Mara Gillespie served as an advisor to former House Speaker John Boehner and former Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Jaime, let me start with you. Give me your evaluation from a Democratic perspective on what we've seen this week and Rand Paul's argument that whether you like them or not, there's a process that's not even being adhered to.
Yeah. Look, I think we said this before. I think Democrats have a lot of fodder to fight back on Donald Trump's agenda. So I think this week has made very clear that Donald Trump has done things unilaterally that are not going to make American lives better. And so I think Democrats, Cory Booker, senator from New Jersey, was just on TV yesterday, and he laid it out sort of very well. Democrats don't have to do anything except reiterate what Donald Trump's doing. And so he said he would take costs down. He has not taken costs down. He's actually added a tax to people with these tariffs. I was talking to the footwear industry today, the folk over there, and they were saying people are going to go from buying 3 pairs of shoes to 1 pair of shoes. It's going to get increasingly more difficult to live in this country, and I think Democrats have to say that.
To that point, and I'm not a Nike customer, pro or con. I'm just looking at what Nike did several years ago. Under urging from the U.S. government, it moved its manufacturing facilities out of China largely to Vietnam.
Correct.
Now they're in Vietnam, and Vietnam is going to face a 46% tariff. And so that creates an issue for the cost of a sneaker.
Yeah, and you're talking about families. Think of a family of 5. The parents have to buy shoes, the kids have to buy shoes for school, and then think about the curricular activities they do: football, basketball, dance, all of that. And so I think people are going to start seeing these things affect their lives a lot sooner than they thought. And so Democrats are going to have to go back to the American people and say, this is bad, and Donald Trump is doing the wrong thing. However, this is our agenda. And so I think, Rand Paul was very, very sincere about his critiques about these tariffs. And it's all true. These tariffs are not going to make the economy better overnight. It's going to make it a lot harder to do things you want to do.
Mara, you're familiar with the conversations within Republican circles. And I know Rand Paul brought up the constitutional argument, not only because he believes in it, he's pretty consistent there, but I think he's hopeful that some Republicans might actually heed that as something that's worth considering, quite separate from whatever they may believe economically or politically about tariffs.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I don't often find myself on the same side as Rand Paul, but here we are. But he's right. You know, largely Republicans have lost their way as far as what we stand for. And the separation of powers, the importance of the Constitution, and recognizing where the authority comes from to make these decisions is important. But you're seeing Republicans largely place their trust in President Trump and hope that, you know, these short-term pains, as he's calling them, will lead to those long-term gains. The unfortunate part is that right now it's a hypothetical. It is a potential long-term gain. There's no guarantees, and it's to be seen whether voters can hang on during these upheavals of grocery costs going up, of your clothing and your footwear going up, and some of these tariffs that are placed not based on individual cases and looking into the country, but by an algorithm that is, I think in some cases, really impersonal and not really going to be effective and quite possibly very damaging.
And Mara, just to get into this at a slightly more granular level of detail, the president does have authority to declare an emergency and therefore invoke tariffs. Any president can do that. But if you say it's an emergency and then the next day say it's still open to negotiation, well, what is it? A negotiation or an emergency? And I think that's what Rand Paul's driving at.
And I think that's exactly what he's driving at. His reasoning isn't passing the smell test, as my former boss, John Boehner, would say. And again, Rand Paul is right in that this needs to be a conversation about the merit of these tariffs and each one. Again, the blanket statements, the blanket tariffs, as opposed to looking into each individual case, is where Republican senators have a right to be frustrated with and can potentially bring that up to the president in these conversations, because we don't know that our allies or other countries are going to be coming to the negotiating table. We don't know that that's a possibility, sure, but there are no guarantees there, which leaves things kind of in an upheaval here.
I mean, you mentioned Senator Cory Booker. I don't want to gloss over this because he did something a little outside the box this week. He stood on the floor of the Senate for 25 hours. It wasn't a filibuster. It was just a long speech, a very long speech, a lot of letters from constituents. Does that carry any weight beyond this week? Is it something more than symbolic? Does it give Democrats a way of thinking about articulating this moment and perhaps galvanizing it in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was historic, and I think the senator deserves a lot of kudos for that. But I think here's the reality of that. I think people have asked Democrats to fight back. And Democrats, for a long time, for the last few months, have not known how to do that. And so I think Cory Booker is now laying out a new blueprint for how to be smart about fighting back. If there are moments where you can stop the train, you should stop the train. If there are moments you can be, you can offer a smarter perspective, you should do that. And so I think over the next couple of months, you'll see in the states, the governors, the mayors are going to start doing a little bit more to stop Donald Trump's agenda.
And Mara, let's talk about this broader conversation around the economy in a way that I know the administration wants to. I'm not doing them any favors. I'm just articulating what they say out loud, which is tariffs are part of it, but we're also going to do deregulatory things, which Republicans support. We're going to cut taxes, which Republicans support, and those things in totality will make things better. Evaluate that part of the White House pushback.
Certainly. Well, the messaging there is important because we should be looking at ways to produce more things here. Manufacturing, deregulating so that we can have more manufacturing here. When I worked for Congressman Kinzinger, one of the bills we introduced was the Made in the Americas Act, and it was to incentivize companies to come to this hemisphere and receive some sort of incentive to do so through deregulation, through tax incentives, because we do want to have more American products, American-made products. Again, I think that looking at it through an individual basis as opposed to blanket policy is going to be really important. And this approach by the White House to try and couch the major concerns people are having with the tariff announcement last night is smart. They're also doing a bit of red meat. If you've heard the president talking about we're being taken advantage of, that is working with his base. So they're going to be willing to hang on a little longer. I think they're going to support the president, and you're seeing that with Mike Johnson and others in the House that aren't worried about losing their authority over having regulations or having the say in those things because they are giving the president the benefit of the doubt right now. But that's to be seen because we have a gubernatorial race coming up here in November with Virginia and New Jersey, and then, of course, down the road we have the midterms.
And, Haima, really for Democrats, what they have to hope for, because they lost this conversation in November on the economy, who's right? They lost it. That all the Democrats can hope for, structurally, maybe they nurse it along, but that there's buyer's remorse among those constituents that you once held that you lost to Trump.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're starting to see that. And I think one of the things that President Trump did was over-index on his relationship with Elon Musk. And Democrats have been very smart about making sure that Elon Musk and Donald Trump are the picture of dysfunction and bad governing. And so I think Democrats have to build on that. We can't just say Donald Trump is bad, his policies are bad. What is the agenda? What sort of policies will Democrats want to do to make the economy stronger? We know that Joe Biden did not wreck the economy. The economy was reeling from COVID. Donald Trump was the president at that time. And so we're going back into a phase where Donald Trump's telling us one thing and we're literally watching another thing happen. I think the real question we have to ask, will this help our competitiveness? Will this make America more competitive in the global market? And I don't think it will. And I, like Tamar's point, we want to bring jobs back to this country. Democrats, Republicans, independents want to have good American jobs, but we also want to be competitive. We want to have good universities. We want to have good colleges and good hospitals. And we want to be innovative in AI and technology. And so some of the things that Donald Trump's been doing over the last couple months goes against that goal.
Jaime Moore, Maura Gillespie, appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Major. Good to see you.
Pentagon watchdog has launched a probe into Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's messaging on Signal. That's that unsecured commercial app. The Defense Department's acting inspector general said he will review the group chat that occurred with Hegseth and other key members of the Trump national security team about military strikes against the Houthis in Yemen. All that happened last month. This is called an evaluation, and it is to determine whether Hegseth and other Pentagon personnel complied with existing Defense Department policies and procedures. He will also look into whether Hegseth complied with classification and records retention requirements. It's called COBOL, and it's older than I am, and that many things are. It is the software that powers the Social Security Administration. But now Elon Musk's DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, wants to replace it. Why that could be, well, somewhat hazardous to those who receive Social Security benefits. More on that next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. The Department of Government Efficiency, as you've heard many times, is very interested in cutting the size of the federal workforce. It also, it says, wants to revamp and modernize government computer systems, which has been thought about and experimented with before. What's interesting here is Elon Musk and his team want to rebuild the Social Security Administration's base code. That's written in a computing language from the early 1960s. Some of it even goes back to the 1950s, to a base code that is more modern. Now, according to a new piece in Wired magazine, that planned source code migration, especially in the very tight time frame that DOGE advisors are looking at, could, at minimum, create some uncertainty and possibly tamper with the benefits received by millions who rely on Social Security. We're joined now by Wired senior writer McKenna Kelly for more on her reporting. McKenna, outline this for us.
Sure. So government systems run in many ways on ancient, archaic coding languages, like you mentioned. The one in question here at the Social Security Administration is a language called COBOL, which stands for a Common Business-Oriented Language. It has been in these core SSA systems for decades. And now DOGE has come in and decided that part of their project will be to rewrite this or use AI to help translate this COBOL code into something more modern, whether that's Rust or Java or something like that, in a new modernization effort. Now, I want to impress that in 2017, the SSA had already started a modernization plan, and the plan to migrate COBOL into something modern, that they expected that to take about 5 years. That plan had to get scaled back because of COVID and resources being diverted to SSA regional offices and things like that. But 5 years was what the expectation is. And DOGE, what it's been stressed to my sources who I talked to for this, they want it done in a matter of weeks or months.
And what could happen if there is some glitch in that new source code?
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that my sources are looking at. So specifically, when it comes to this SSA system, like I said, it's decades old, and a lot of it is patchwork together. One source told me that there are about 3,600 different apps within SSA, and then when you do one transaction with one customer, oftentimes people at the Social Security Administration will have to use 70 different apps. On the back end, these are all patchworked together. And the main concern with doing this translation, this modernization, is that you're not going to catch all of those edge cases. Folks who have been working on these systems for a very long time told me that it's not even a concern that the beneficiaries will be overpaid or underpaid, but in some circumstances they could not be paid at all, and the administration wouldn't have any idea if it happened.
And McKenna, you mentioned this effort in 2017 that was derailed by COVID. Does the initial work product or orientation of that 2017 plan still exist? And it would seem to me, as a novice, I don't know very much about this, that would be a place for the DOGE team to begin. Are they even paying any attention to that?
Not from the people that I'm speaking to. It doesn't sound like it. If anything, they are getting rid of a lot of the staff with this institutional knowledge on how to run these systems, who know this language. Because like I said, this is a very old language, right? Kids who are coming out of engineering school right now, it's something that they're not even learning. And so a lot of these folks are getting deferred resignations, like we've heard, the fork in the road email, and also these early retirement packages. And it's those folks, right, who know so granularly how the system works, and they're asking them to leave.
And so, bottom line, if you're a Social Security recipient, or you might be one in the next year or two, I guess the possible things you ought to fret about is you might drop out of the system, you might be underpaid, or you might get something that is unrecognizable to you in terms of your expected benefits and have a very hard way of solving that problem.
I do want to stress that this is a very early stages in this project, but over the last couple of weeks, we have seen massive outages at the Social Security Administration. When you were to log into My SSA and view your benefits, there was a meeting at the administration earlier this week where the acting administrator interviewed a lot of folks who are on his staff and mentioned that there is a huge uptick in people asking to receive these services, asking for insight into what it is that their benefits are, wanting to print out statements and things like that just in case these systems were to go down. But yes, the code base, this trying to modernize it, it's still very early stages. They're trying to build a team and figure out how to do this. But even while they're not necessarily messing with the code, even these cuts in staff have been seemingly causing issues with people trying to even access the website.
McKenna Kelly, keep on this. We want to keep you around on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been called notorious, a hellhole, inhumane. Next, we'll take a look at the grim conditions inside El Salvador's CECOT mega prison. That's next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. A prison in El Salvador, commonly known as CECOT, is gaining renewed attention here in the United States after the Trump administration deported hundreds of migrants there, alleging that they were members of a Venezuelan gang. A new documentary provides an inside look at this facility that holds criminals, terrorists, and potentially innocent people among them. It has long drawn criticism, this prison, from human rights organizations. The man behind that documentary interviewed an inmate who has spent the last 25 years as a high-ranking gang member.
How many people's lives have you ended? Is it 5 or 10? How many?
No, if you talk about what you used to do in the jails after, it probably get a few, more than 50. You gotta do it sometimes.
The documentary filmmaker Ruhi Chenet joins me now. His YouTube page has more than 13 million subscribers. His documentary has been viewed more than 84 million times. Ruhi, I'm glad you're joining us. Thanks for coming on. What was your experience there? How would you describe not only the facility, but the inmates inside?
It was very intense. It was like stepping inside a controlled chaos. When I was inside the modules, every inmate were just looking at me. So it was really, really intense. And it was one of a kind experience. As you know, CECOT is the world's strictest and largest prison. It has a capacity of 40,000, but prisoners there are the most dangerous people you can even imagine. It was constructed to imprison the highest profile criminals.
And you talk in the documentary about what the incidences of murder was in El Salvador before this prison was built and what it has been after. Tell us that story.
Yeah, El Salvador once had the highest rate of lives lost due to widespread chaos. During its peak, 104 out of every 100,000 people lost their lives in a single year. Although the current government's methods are controversial, by 2023, the number dramatically dropped to 2.4 per 100,000 people. The results are undeniable. Peace has returned to the neighborhoods, but there are also many controversies, including this prison.
And day to day, what is the life of an inmate inside this prison like, Ruhi?
It's really tough. First of all, 80 to up to 150 inmates live inside a single cell. Even though the prison isn't full, that's their policy, so they don't have any privacy, or they don't have a lot of spaces to move around. They are constantly being observed. There's a catwalk area above the cells. Guards consistently watch over the inmates from this elevated spot. If anything suspicious happens, they intervene with an extensive network of cameras observing them 24/7. And they even installed pebbles around the fortress. So if you look at the eyes of inmates, you will see emptiness in their soul. Their lives is so monotone and they look very robotic. All of them wear white shirts, shorts, socks, and slippers. They don't have any other belongings. And where they sleep is just metal bunks. No pillow, no mattress. Along with what they wear, each prisoner receives just the bare essentials, a white sheet, and a towel. That's it. The prisoners spend their entire lives on their 4-level bunk beds. They have stacked tightly like items stored in a warehouse. Each cell holds around 80 inmates, as I said before, but they only have about 5 square feet of personal space, and they don't even have ventilation rights or courtyards to walk outside their cell. So it's really a stable life.
And Ruhi, how do they shower or bathe themselves and use facilities to relieve themselves?
Yeah, inside the cells, they have 2 toilets for 80 inmates, and these toilets are at the front corner of the cell. They have to do their business in front of everyone with no privacy. Same place where they use the toilet is also where they take showers, which is an open spot, all in full view of others. As part of hygiene and order, inmates are shaved every 2 weeks by a personnel. Long hair or beards aren't just unhygienic, they can also hide sharp objects. So no privacy and also very unhygienic. Also, as you know, these inmates are gang members. Mostly are from Barrio 18 and MS-13, and these gangs are rival to each other. So the prison system keeps their gang members inside the same cell. They can't trust anybody. They can't move around. Also, very unhygienic conditions. It's a horrible, horrible looking lifestyle.
So for someone who is a gang member, accused, convicted of murder, that's where they're going to be. But what if you're an innocent? What if you're there by accident? Do you ever leave? Do you have any contact with the outside world?
They won't have any contacts, as family visits are forbidden. And that is true. Some of the prisoners are mistakenly arrested and put inside these jails because police look for tattoos on people, and if some people look suspicious and have a lot of tattoos, that is enough for that person to get arrested. Also, there are other controversies surrounding this topic. The tour that we have taken was organized by the prison system. There were 8 modules, but we were inside only one of those modules. So we don't know what is going on inside the other modules. We didn't see any woman in there. Also, there are rumors that there are children inside these cells, which is also a very controversial thing.
Ruhi Chenit, the documentary filmmaker, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.